Okay, so that's done. Okay.
All right, so promise no weird stories today.
So today we are doing Daniel 4 and 5. And like I said, I apologize for not taping last week, which we did Daniel 3, which was the fiery furnace, just a 30-second review. Daniel's friend, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused to bow down to the image that King Nebuchadnezzar erected. And as a result, they were thrown into the fiery furnace. And they came out of the furnace perfectly fine. And we ended the chapter with King Nebuchadnezzar including Yahweh as part of his 2,000 plus group of gods. And so that's important. There's been some question, and we want to make sure we look at that. So far, Nebuchadnezzar, there's 2,000 plus gods, and this time he said, yes, Yahweh will put him among those. He might even be one of the top ones. Yep. Yeah, but, and at that time, the boys were probably in their late 20s, just to give you a timeline. So now we're on to Daniel 4, and we have to fast forward a little bit. You know, we don't know the date. Sometimes we know the dates for sure because of history books, but Daniel 4, we don't know the dates for sure, but there are those who think it's about 580 BC. And Daniel will be in his late 40s. So this is 20 years after chapter Daniel 3, and 20 years since the fiery furnace. And do you want to start reading? Or do you want me to read it? Then I can read new stuff, right? So we're on Daniel 4, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar, to the people of every nation and language who dwell in all the earth, may your prosperity be multiplied. I'm pleased to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. So do you want to give just why he's talking here?
Yeah, he's about to tell a story. One of the things I told you some strange stories the last couple of weeks. These stories are, for a lot of people, they're fairy tales. They're allegories. They're not real because they're big stories. And part of my goal, what I really want, is to hopefully get some of you to understand the way this is always taught to us. The three young Jewish men in the furnace. This story we're about to read today. These are all like separate little tales. And they seem so fantastic that we think, oh, they're there to teach us a lesson. They're not there to be real. But what I've been trying to say as we went along is that this whole book of Daniel is one story. And the very beginning of it, if you remember the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, the head of gold, the body and arms of silver, bronze, and then iron and clay mixed. This is a prophecy that all of the events that are about to unfold in the world, the known world, lead up to Christ. They lead up to Messiah, Mashiach, all of it. This whole book points to that event. And the events that are unfolding, these nations set the stage for the world that Jesus is born into. He came at the appointed time, but the reason it's the appointed time is because of all of these events that line up along the way. And we're told about it in such a way that you can see how they did unfold and go, oh my, that is the story we were told. That is the prophecy. All of these stories are linked. If they were separated, you could ask yourself, why would God do such weird things? I mean, they almost seem like they don't make sense. What I want to try and show you today is what's happening here there's this prophecy. Nebuchadnezzar, remember, is the head of gold. He is the most magnificent of these world kingdoms to come. He's not maybe not the strongest or the meanest, but the most magnificent. And the lessons that he gets taught are for our benefit by far as much as his, that this is not your work. What happens, what unfolds, Nebuchadnezzar, is not your work. God did this. And we're told repeatedly, even though we tend to overlook it, that God put Nebuchadnezzar where he was. And he's going to be responsible for the kingdoms that follow in the prophecy. But at the end of it, there's another one here. What happens is there is no doubt in anyone's mind that it was not done through the might of Nebuchadnezzar's hand, through his strength or might. It is God moving the events. And as we go through them, and now today I hope brings that together, you can see it in the whole book of Daniel, that it's all pointing towards one thing. It's all accomplishing one goal. And these are not just kooky stories. This is not a story of a God who just does these irrational things. They're there for a purpose. This is one of the most important sort of nexus points, this book of Daniel, in the entire Bible. And it's like that for a reason. So.
And in chapter 4, the part I'm going to read now, they believe Daniel wrote the book of Daniel. This chapter, Daniel 4, Nebuchadnezzar is telling his story. And on one of the commentaries I read this week, they say it is his witness. And I thought, since you hit witness all the time, this is his
we can
testimony.
only bear witness to those things we have seen with our own eyes and heard with our own ears. And this is Nebuchadnezzar saying, this is what happened to me. This is my experience with Yahweh. I saw it, I lived it. We might as well, we can show this one picture real quick. You want to do it later?
Next chapter.
It's in the next chapter. I can't show you yet. There's a picture coming, but you can't see it.
Okay, so verse 4. Yes.
As a background, we've got Yahweh, the Most High, and then we have, 2,000 other gods?
Yes.
Did any of those other gods go through the same test that just show me, pull me out of the fire?
If you look, what Nebuchadnezzar himself says, and this is why the 3 men in the furnace is important. This is part of the story that I'm trying to reveal through this, is at the end of that experience, Nebuchadnezzar himself, who is arguably the most powerful human on the planet at that time, Nebuchadnezzar says, I have to admit, there is a God who could deliver you from my hands. Think about that, because he sees himself virtually as a God. He's made the statement, no God could deliver you from my hands. And then he says, well, yeah, I was wrong. There is a God who could. No other God could deliver in this way. And he says what you just said, that no other God, none of these other ones could do what this one did in this circumstance. He still sees the need to have a pantheon of gods, but he acknowledges, so exactly what you said, Nebuchadnezzar himself said, no other God could deliver in this way. So I would say the answer to that question is no other one.
But he hasn't quite left it, because he said that the Most High has performed for me. I'm not sure it was performed for Nebuchadnezzar.
Well, no, you're right.
God, I want
But in a way, to go to what I'm saying, Nebuchadnezzar, by the time today is over with, our lessons today, if we do them, Nebuchadnezzar actually testifies. Okay, so in a way, it is for Nebuchadnezzar, because he's got to see he's the most powerful human on the planet, and he's forced to acknowledge that Yahweh is supreme. It's a big deal.
So verse 4, Nebuchadnezzar was at ease in my house and flourishing in my palace. I had a dream, and it frightened me. While in my bed, the images and visions in my mind alarmed me. So I issued a decree that all the wise men of Babylon be brought before me to interpret the dream for me. When the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners came in, I told them the dream, and they could not interpret it for me. But at last, into my presence came Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And I told him the dream. O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and that no mystery baffles you. So explain to me the vision I saw in my dream and their interpretation. In these visions of my mind, as I was lying in the bed, I saw this come to pass. There was a tree in the midst of the land, and its height was great. The tree grew large and strong. Its top reached the sky, and it was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit was abundant, and upon it was food for all. Under it, the beasts of the fields found shelter. In its branches, the birds of the air nested, and from it, every creature was fed. As I lay on my bed, I also saw in the vision of my mind a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. He called out in a loud voice, cut down the tree and chop off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But leave the stump with its roots in the ground and a band of iron and bronze around it. In the tender grass of the field, let him be drenched with the dew of the heaven and graze with the beasts of the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given to the mind of a beast, till 7 times pass him by. This decision is the decree of the watchers, the verdict declared by the holy ones, so that the living will know that the Most High rules over the kingdom of mankind and gives it to whom he wishes, setting over it the lowliest of men. This is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw. Now, Belshazzar, tell me the interpretation, because none of the wise men of my kingdom can interpret it for me, but you are able, because the spirit of the holy gods is in you.
So, I don't know what to say about that.
Well,
It's
I
another
think
dream.
one interesting thing. So this is a dream. Remember in chapter 2, when King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, he refused to tell anybody what the dream was. And so, someone had to come up with a dream. This time he's telling everybody, here's the dream, interpret it. So that there's a difference there. And some of the commentaries say, you could probably figure out that this means that his kingdom's going to come to an end, this great thing. It wasn't such a mystery, maybe what this dream was, but none of the enchanters or the other ones were gutsy enough to.
We haven't gotten there yet.
Well, yeah, we have. He refused to do it. Stop. Okay. Daniel interprets the second dream.
It is, they don't want to deliver bad news. It seems like this one might have been easier to interpret, but who knows? But I think it's pretty clear that those court enchanters, the wise men, don't want to deliver bad news. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. For a time, Daniel, who was also known as Belteshazzar, was perplexed, and his thoughts alarmed him. So the king said, Belshazzar, do not let this dream or its interpretations alarm you. My lord, replied Belshazzar, may the dream apply to those who hate you and its interpretations to your enemies.
So it's obviously going to be bad for Nebuchadnezzar, and I think he probably senses that. And there were times where you hear, don't kill the messenger. There were kings who literally had people killed who delivered bad news. And you would think that would probably have a chilling effect on messengers bearing bad news. They're only going to want to give the king the kind of news he wants to hear. And it's been the downfall of kings. And so he tells him, look, don't worry about it. And I kind of have to give Nebuchadnezzar credit. And he says, it doesn't matter. I just want to hear the truth. I mean, this is a strong man. But this last thing, where Daniel says, my Lord, may the dream apply to those who hate you. Do you remember just here a short time back when we did David, and he's waiting for news of his son Absalom, and that runner comes in? You know, the two of them come, but the second one is going to bear the truth. And he says, what about the young man Absalom? And he says, may what happened to him happen to your worst enemies. And this is so similar. This is the same idea. This is really bad news. And I wish I could tell you that it was going to happen to somebody that you really dislike, but I can't. It happened. It's going to happen to you.
My Lord, replied Belshazzar, may this, okay, verse 20, sorry. The tree you saw that grew large and strong, whose top reached the sky and was visible to all the earth, whose foliage was beautiful and whose fruit was abundant, providing food for all, under which the beast of the field lives, and in which the branches of the birds of the air nested. You, O king, are that tree. For you have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown to reach the sky, and your dominion extends to the ends of the earth. And you, O king, saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump with its roots in the ground, and a band of iron and bronze around it, in the tender grass of the field. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and grazed with the beasts of the field, till 7 times pass by him. This is the interpretation. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree that the Most High has issued against my lord the king. You'll be driven away from mankind, and your dwelling will be with the beasts of the field. You will feed on the grass like an ox, and be drenched with dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass by you, until you acknowledge that the Most High rules over the kingdom of mankind and gives it to whom he wishes. And for the command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots, your kingdom will be restored to you as soon as you acknowledge that heaven rules. Therefore, may my advice be pleasing to you, O king. Break away from your sins by doing what is right, and from your inequities by showing mercy to the oppressed. Perhaps there will be an extension of your prosperity.
Yeah, so bottom line, he's telling him that the most powerful man on the planet, the most powerful king, is going to be driven out, live like a beast, and lose his kingdom for times. Remember, we talked about times mean year in this context, for 7 years. And then you're gonna be, once you finally acknowledge that Yahweh is supreme, that Yahweh is the one who's driving these events, you'll be given your kingdom back.
So why don't you show that before I read this part?
And this is one of those things, when we hear the rest of this story, that a lot of people are left thinking this is an allegory. This is a fairy tale, because powerful men don't suddenly lose their minds and live like beasts. I want to show you a picture. If you can see it, this is Howard Hughes.
Change the view here just a sec for these guys. View, speaker view.
This is,
wait a minute. Oh, can't do that.
we have to learn how to do this properly. But full screen, except now click on that one, see if that'll.
Nope.
Okay, so you'll have to look at a little picture of Howard Hughes, but this is him, as Gene says, in his prime. He is handsome, he is rich, he is powerful. He is one of the more powerful men on the planet. And this is him near the end of his life. And if he just left and became this sort of recluse, he lived apart from people. And since it's a small picture, you can't really see, but his fingernails literally look like claws. They look like some kind of beast claws. We have seen this in modern days of a man very much like that. So the idea that you think something goes amiss with Nebuchadnezzar and he begins to live like this, it's not even out of our modern day experience, much less are we forced to think of it as a fairy tale.
So verse 28, all of this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as he was walking on the roof of the palace of Babylon, the king exclaimed, "Is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built by the might of my power as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty?" While the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven. "It is decreed to you, King Nebuchadnezzar, that the kingdom has departed from you. You'll be driven away from mankind to live with the beasts of the fields, and you will feed on grass like an ox. And 7 times will pass you by until you acknowledge that the Most High rules over the kingdom of mankind and gives it to whom he wishes." At that moment, the sentence against Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from mankind. He ate grass like an ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. But at the end of those days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven, and my sanity was restored to me. Then I praised the Most High, and I honored and glorified him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are counted as nothing, and he does as he pleases with the army of heaven and the peoples of the earth. There is no one who can restrain his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time, my sanity was restored. My honor and splendor returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and nobles sought me out, and I was restored to my throne, and surpassing greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, for all his works are true and all his ways are just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride.
So if you go back to the last section where we stopped, Daniel tells him what's going to happen. And he says, my advice to you, and I hope you'll listen, is that you tear yourself away. And it's one of those, I'm not going to bore you with it, but that little section is kind of an important part of remembering this is all Aramaic, but it is the equivalent of the word that's used in the Torah that we call repent. You tear yourself away from what you've been doing. And he says, and maybe your years of prosperity will be extended. The prophecy is gonna come true, but maybe you'll get a bit of a reprieve if you repent from this arrogance and from you taking all this wealth and not, and that's the way Daniel, being a good Jewish man, has grown up. That's the way he thinks, and he advises it. And what we see is that Nebuchadnezzar, if you were over all of this kingdom, this empire that he has, and the descriptions that we have from historians of the time of how magnificent the walls of Babylon, you could put chariots side by side. They claim they actually held chariot races on the walls. Unassailable. You can't be defeated. You have the more gold than anybody has ever seen in one place. And he's standing up on the wall, very self-satisfied, saying, is this not Babylon the Great that I've built with my own hand? Remember, we've been told more than once that God favored Nebuchadnezzar. God put him where he is. And Nebuchadnezzar has been warned. And now he's I've done this with my own right hand. And at that moment, the prophecy kicks in. He says, the hard part here, and this is why I started the way I did, is that it's tempting to say that this is a lesson to us about arrogance and pride. Keep in mind what I said at the beginning. This whole story is about these events that are unfolding in history, and it is Nebuchadnezzar being forced to acknowledge, because it really doesn't have as much impact coming from anyone else. If Daniel says, Nebuchadnezzar's mighty, but only because of Yahweh. Nebuchadnezzar has to say it himself. And that's what we're getting in the rest of this story. And so this is to humble him to the point that he acknowledges Yahweh, so that we see that everything then that comes to pass is set in motion by Yahweh, by God. And so he says, is this not a wonderful thing? And it says he's told your time is up, and he's driven out from people. He looks like Howard Hughes. His hair looks like feathers. His nails look like claws. And he's just crazy as a bed bug, as I grew up in South Texas being told. I don't even know what that means. Do you? But he's there's another one I can't even say, but he's crazy as a bed bug. And it's like that for 7 years. And he's told that your kingdom will not be overthrown. It'll be there waiting for you. But then Nebuchadnezzar, we have the way it's written, and it's believed, by the way, that this story, this chapter, was circulated. It was written and then circulated across his empire. This is Nebuchadnezzar's testimony to what has happened to him. And I'm going to get to it, and because Mary won't let me show the picture yet, but there are historical records that bear out some of these things.
Well, I was going to ask you to start now. So, and aside from this, some people use this story because there's no historical evidence that Nebuchadnezzar went crazy for 7 years and didn't rule his kingdom, then got his kingdom back. That's not written there. However, what is written, the Babylonians, as we have talked about, were this extremely advanced society with records and mathematics and building. We got so much from the Babylonian Empire. But from the years 582 to 575 BC, which is 7 years, there is no records of government activity happening in Babylon. And they kept, you want to show the picture? So
it's little. This is hard for you to see.
So what that is, that's a stone. And these stones have really detailed writings of every trade activity. And it's like they kept a journal of all government activity. And there's been no stones found that cover 582 to 575 BC. And that is as far as when you're trying to piece together when these stories happen, that's when the story would have happened.
It hasn't been that long ago that the historians, the experts, insisted that there was never anyone named Nebuchadnezzar. We don't have any historical records that someone named Nebuchadnezzar actually existed. And then they did another excavation, and they began to pull out these stones. And not only is there a Nebuchadnezzar, but they have some real detailed records of some of the things that he did, some of the things that we read about. And so they just had to stop that particular line of dismissal of this story. No one has any doubt today that there actually was a person named Nebuchadnezzar. The Babylonians left us, I don't remember, square roots and I think decimal points, but matrix mathematics, they were highly advanced. And a lot of our mathematics has its root in the Babylonians, and the records that they kept were extremely detailed. The records of their trading and, some of their histories, they left, good record behind. And again, they swore there could be no Nebuchadnezzar because they have such good records and we don't have them. And then they've excavated them. So there is a lot of actual historical reason to believe these things that we're told. The story about the records, maybe they'll discover some, but as of right now, there's a gap in some of their
journaling.
Journaling of the kingdom. And it certainly seems like it could parallel this time of Nebuchadnezzar.
One last thing before we turn to chapter 5. So what do you think happened? This is the last time we hear of Nebuchadnezzar, by the way. We're going to fast forward to another king here in chapter 5. So did Nebuchadnezzar have Yahweh as his only God?
Yeah, no, not exactly. But what he does do, we don't know. But what he does do is acknowledge that this Hebrew God, this Yahweh, is supreme. And I thought about this a lot this week, being the polytheist that he is. He acknowledges, at the very least, he says the King of heaven, or the King of the heavens. At the very least, he acknowledges that Yahweh is supreme above anything else that he, Nebuchadnezzar, believes in, any of these other gods. We don't know any more than that, but that is the point in this. I guess I should have mentioned that there's a point in there where he begins to, what he does, is recite a psalm. It's not a psalm. It's not Ecclesiastes. I should know, but it's in the Old Testament. It's in the Torah, and he's reciting Jewish scripture that his is an everlasting kingdom, and on and on. And some people doubt the veracity of the story because of that. They say, why would he be reciting something from the Torah? It looks fairly obvious that Daniel himself wrote this down for Nebuchadnezzar, and he includes this because it's like he's saying what Nebuchadnezzar is saying here is that his is an everlasting kingdom, and all of the Jews who read this will recognize the scripture. He is acknowledging the supremacy of Yahweh. Whether he decides to accept him as the only one God, we don't know.
And I like the last sentence. And he, Yahweh, is able to humble those who walk in pride.
Even Nebuchadnezzar was humbled. And that we get at the end to the point that I started with, that this man who fancies himself a god or more powerful than the gods, Yahweh humbles him and he acknowledges it.
So we
Hold
go.
on.
Oh, sorry.
Are you concerned a little bit about if Daniel scripted Nebuchadnezzar's ode to humility and acknowledgement of the Most High, then it's not Nebuchadnezzar himself, the
Yes.
believer in all the gods, polytheistic. Doesn't that bring down the credibility, the specific point that we want to make? If it's coming from Daniel, we already knew that from the beginning. So why are we trying to get a king?
So what are you saying we can't believe any of it because Daniel scripted that?
I'm just saying it's an interesting point that if it's, we have that line where he's thinking about it and the voice comes like the dove from Jesus and say, hey, listen to what you're doing. So it's not Daniel in the dream and the interpretation of the dream. Now in the process of the 7 years, whatever time that could have been a year as far as we're concerned, he gets this direct message that I'm like, Jesus asking the apostles, come with thee. Nobody says no.
All I can tell you about that, Gene, is this. If Nebuchadnezzar had disagreed with the words, he would never have allowed them to be circulated. Would you? Would you allow someone to put words in your mouth?
Well, if I were the early Nebuchadnezzar and I was killing people and doing all of that sort of stuff, probably because I'm the God. Nobody else can do it.
And you then would allow someone to put words in your mouth that weren't true and say, Nebuchadnezzar says this. He probably would have had you killed for doing that.
That's right.
Go ahead.
I have a comment. The problem is we Christians don't have the faith of our dreams in the 20th and in 21st century that those God-fearing people had in the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Probably something has been lost here. Probably something has been lost here. I agree. Yeah.
The hardest thing to do is to convince somebody of a dream. And
I agree. I can speak from experience. It's a hard thing to do.
Should we go?
Yeah, we need to hit the next one.
Okay.
We're gonna get there.
Daniel 5. So I'm going to give you, so like I said, that was the last time we hear of Nebuchadnezzar. So we have to catch up. Nebuchadnezzar ends up dying in 562 BC. We know that to be a fact. They believe there's between 562 and 554, when this king takes over, it believes that Nebuchadnezzar's son becomes king, and then he gets killed by his son-in-law. It's like, if you try to look at history, it's about 3 or 4 kings that come in and out of this time period. And at 554, King Belshazzar, so very similar to what they call Daniel.
Might as well mention it because it just confuses people to no end. Nebuchadnezzar's patron god is Bel, B-E-L. And he names Daniel, he gives him a Babylonian name, Belteshazzar, Shatzar, actually. And it means God, or Bel, preserves his life, or Bel watches his life. His grandson, as we find out, Belshazzar, in the original language in Aramaic, they're not as similar as they seem. The first part, Bel, is the same, but the grandson's name means God protects the king. Daniel's was God protects his life. And you think just with the addition of like a T, well, it's more than that. But this is translation and we have to live with it. It's confusing, but try and understand. Belteshazzar was Daniel. Belshazzar is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, his descendant.
And so that before we start reading it, the other thing is it says his son. In Aramaic, there is no word for grandson or so it means descendant. And so in history, this shows it was his grandson. It was most likely Nebuchadnezzar's daughter's son, is what they believe.
So yeah, and that people stick on that, and there are people who want to debunk this because it says that he's Nebuchadnezzar's son, but it's a thing that means descendant. We have a song that appears in probably most of our hymnals, Faith of Our Fathers, holy, faith, we will be true to thee till death. Our fathers, it doesn't mean my dad, faith of our dads. It means our forerunners. In Hebrew, you have the word bar that means it's son, but Bar Jonah could have been your grandfather. He could have been your great-grandfather. You are from the house of Jonah. So yeah, it's not a big deal, but people try and make it a big deal.
We do know the date basically of what's happening in Daniel 5 because of history, and it is 539 BC. Daniel is now in his 80s, you guys. And, previously after we did chapter 2, we went on to chapter 7 and 8. And I told you at that time, some of Daniel is not written all in order. So 7 and 8 actually happened when Daniel was in his 70s. So he had those 2 visions. They weren't dreams because he was awake. He had his 2 visions, but now he is in his 80s. So Daniel's in his 80s. There has been 3 or 4 kings after Nebuchadnezzar, and it's been from
Very short-lived.
562 to 554. And at this time, at the beginning of chapter 5, King Belshazzar has been king for probably 15 years. Okay, so that gives you the setting. Sorry.
Always keep in mind, this is the story that began with the dream of the statue. And it is the end of the Babylonian Empire is about to happen. This is when we get to the end of it. Daniel was alive to see the end of that first empire. He doesn't obviously see the next.
Later, a king Belshazzar held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he drank wine with them. Under the influence of the wine, Belshazzar gave orders to bring in the gold and silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king could drink from them, along with his nobles, his wives, and his concubines. Thus they brought in gold vessels that had been taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king drank from them, along with his nobles, his wives, and his concubines. As they drank the wine, they praised their gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. At that moment, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. As the king watched the hand that was writing, his face grew pale and his thoughts so alarmed him that his hips gave way and his knees knocked together. The king called out for the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners to be brought in. And he said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this inscription and tells me its interpretation will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. So the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the inscription or interpret it for him. Then King Belshazzar became even more terrified. His great face grew more pale, and his nobles were bewildered. Hearing the outcry of the king and his nobles, the queen entered the banquet hall. "O king, may you live forever," she said. "Do not let your thoughts terrify you or your face grow pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the days of your father, he was found to have insight, intelligence, and wisdom like that of the kings, the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Your own father, the king, did this because Daniel, the one he called Belteshazzar, was found to have an extraordinary spirit, as well as knowledge, understanding, and the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Summon Daniel, therefore, and he will give you the interpretation."
So Nebuchadnezzar's dead. In the intervening time, the descendants don't really have any use for Daniel. They don't think about him. He's somewhere doing something. This party, he summons 1,000 of the important people. Okay, you just, they're the lower level rulers, all the important people. He summons in 1,000, whether it's exactly or not. It's a lot. It's designed to show that anybody who's anybody is there. And he has this drunken, feast. And he goes and grabs the silver and gold vessels that Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple and uses them to pour wine. And, that's part of the message. And this hand writes on the wall. We don't even know if the other people could see it. We're not told. The people question, and there are whole commentaries written on it. Don't know. It doesn't say. We don't know.
I want to show, and by the way, Cheryl texts me that Scott's going to show one other picture here. And if you can click on your participants view, those of you who are watching, and you'll be able to see the full screen of what you're showing. Somehow we can't do that, but go ahead. Do you want to show that? So this is Rembrandt. And I thought, since we have lots of people, we thought that since we have a lot of people that are artists or art likers, oh no, so that went to Louise. I don't know why. So anyhow,
Here's a little picture of a Rembrandt.
This is called, this is called the Belshazzar's Feast, I believe. And so there's Belshazzar with the writings on the wall. So
the Babylonian Empire has descended to the point, and it's about to end. This is an important point in this. And the grandson, Belshazzar, what's that? Oh, there we go. Now you have the benefit of seeing me talk. The grandson has just, he thinks my walls are so thick, I've got enough food. Some people think they may have had enough food for a couple of years. Certainly had enough food for a long time. This Mede and Persian Empire is outside the walls, and they know it. And his answer to it is lock the gates and throw a party. He's not much of a king. Nebuchadnezzar, for all you might think about him, was a very good king. He would have dealt with this. His grandson locks the gates, closes them up, and throws a party. And it shows how important he is, because he invites 1,000 people to drink with him.
Out of vessels from the
out of
Jewish temple.
vessels from the Jewish temple. Yeah, that's the point.
So Daniel was brought before the king, who asked him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father, the king, brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and extraordinary wisdom. Now the wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this inscription and interpret it for me, but they could not give me its interpretation. But I have heard about you, that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Therefore, if you can read this inscription and give me its interpretation, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." In response, Daniel said to the king, "You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the inscription for the king and interpret it for him. As for you, O king, the most high God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness, glory and honor. Because of the greatness that he bestowed on him, the people of every nation and language trembled in fear before him. He killed those whom he wished and kept alive those he wished. He exalted whom he wished and humbled whom he wished. But when his heart became arrogant and his spirit was hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven away from mankind, and his mind was like that of a beast. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like an ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of mankind, setting over it whom he wishes. But you, his son, O Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all of this. Instead, you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven. The vessels from his house were brought to you, and as you drank wine from them and your nobles' wives and concubines, you praised your gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you have failed to glorify the God who holds in his hand your breath, your very breath, and all your ways. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. Do you want to say something about this inscription before we get to the inscription? We're at, by the way.
It's not a matter of saying this word means this word means this. It's just like the statue. The head of gold, it's a head of gold. Daniel interpreted it to mean you are the most magnificent of these empires that is to come. By the same token, these words have a meaning, but it doesn't spell out what this vision is saying. And it's we don't have time, and I wouldn't bore you anyway with all of the speculation that goes on over it. But it's pretty simple. Daniel's given an interpretation of a symbolic message.
Now, this is the interpretation that was written, Mene, tekel, parsin. And this is the interpretation of the message. Mene means that God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel means that you have been weighed on the scale and found deficient. Parsin means your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel in purple, placed a gold chain around his neck, and proclaimed him the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom at the age of 62. Wow.
So the best interpretation I can come up with, mene, what's written is that it's Aramaic, it's a mina, it's a coin. A tekel is the word shekel pronounced differently, and you say, how could that happen? I grew up in Victoria. If you drive to Goliad, as you come into town on the right, there's a little church, and it was called Minnehulla, Minnehulla, Minnehulla Baptist Church. And I always wondered, why did they name something Minnehulla? And I went through, tried to find is there some biblical reference? What is that about? Until one day, just before you get there, you cross over something called Manahuia Creek. It's a Spanish word, And it looks, and the best that the settlers could do, they knew that how it was in Spanish, they morphed that into Minnehaha. It happens with languages all the time. So mina, these are these two coins. A shekel is a weight and also a coin. U is and. This parsin is the plural of Perez. Bottom line, these are some words that don't, if they could have read them, wouldn't mean anything to the average person. Daniel's given the interpretation that you have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. These small coins versus a big coin, I suppose, is this representation that he's the small coin. But none of us would have come up with that. It's again, an interpretation from God. But the first thing he does that tends to get overlooked is he reminds him of his grandfather who refused to acknowledge that his power had come from this Yahweh, from this God that he worships, and he was humbled. And he's telling him, you're about to get humbled. You're going to get more than humbled. This message, this writing is in fact the end of the Babylonian Empire. It happens that night. And there's a whole story about how the river, the Euphrates, ran through the city. And this Mede and Persian army diverted it. They put in a block and diverted the water, and they went through because the water would have been too deep for them to wear armor. That's why they didn't get invaded. They diverted a river, and they invaded Babylon in force, and they reached a people who were totally unprepared. I don't think Nebuchadnezzar would have been unprepared, but they've gotten to the point, it's their time, and they've been weakened, and this, brilliant Mede and Persian empire invades them, and that says that night he's killed. It's the end of the first episode of the statue. This is the end of the golden head, and at the end of it, Daniel is left, because Daniel's left alive, by the way. He actually is taken and serves the new ruler in Babylon. Daniel is left to tell this story and to see the change of the first empires. So,
Wow.
anything else?
Well, we're at time.
You're unconvinced?
No, it's, there are a lot of things going through my mind, and I touched base with you earlier. The writing style, Daniel, a lot of odes, got King David. I mean, this group, whoever's writing is writing from the same textbook, coming down and following the story. I agree with you. The story is about the conditions before Jesus. Okay, very well. I've got as much game as I can. I thought we had that working, but okay, at one time it was. What's that? Time to go? It is one of those things, Gene, that it's a very important prediction of the entire state of the world leading up to the coming of the Messiah. And it is this first leg of it, and the beginning of the second leg, by the way, that we're left with this record that said, and the funny thing is, historically, a lot of the things that they use to debunk it have since they've been forced to say, well, okay, maybe that's true, but still your arguments that the writing doesn't, maybe it's not one person, you have to decide on that. I look at the consistency of the story with history, and I think, it probably is very much what's being represented here. I do believe it. But
one more thing before you say the closing prayer. One of the things that hit me, we believe so strongly that we need to study the background of the Bible to understand what they were saying at the time they were saying it and what the situation was. But the thing we came away with today, the other side of that, is you do have to look at it in the bigger picture. And I was really happy that we were going to study 4 and 5 today, because the fact that you look at 5 and 30 years later, he's saying, remember, I said this to your grandfather, And, or, I was told this through Yahweh to your grandfather, he listened to it, you haven't listened to it. And it all fits together.
Last thing, along the lines of what you're saying, and there's no time and nobody wants to hear it, but I spent a whole bunch of time over the last few weeks. The thing you have to keep in mind is this is written in Aramaic, not in Hebrew, because this is the story of this pagan polytheistic emperor who's been put in place to carry out God's will. And from the beginning is Hebrew, and when it shifts into Nebuchadnezzar's world, it becomes Aramaic. There's a word in there where it talks about the Most High God that Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges the Most High. And people have said, because I've read these arguments, I know what you're saying, and I've read the arguments, but people say Nebuchadnezzar wouldn't. Well, it turns out it is an Aramaic word, Ilya, which is similar to the word that we read, but it actually comes from to ascend. It literally means most high. It's the God above all the others. And as I've gone through, and now I've had to actually try and learn some stuff about Aramaic. The more I look at it, all I can tell you is the more convinced I am that Daniel wrote this, and it is in fact true. That I've come away with more assurance than I would have had before, because you see things, and the voice that you hear is in fact Aramaic, and it is slightly different because the way people think affects the way they talk. And if you're writing in Aramaic, it's going to come out sounding different than if it originates in Hebrew. And it has been an amazing journey for me in the last few weeks, seeing that in action. So, you have to come to a conclusion, but my conclusion is Daniel wrote this because he was schooled in Aramaic in those first years, and he wrote it himself. I believe it.
Closing prayer.
Real quick, it's very similar to the red letter in the Bible. Jesus' wording is pretty. Given Daniel's history and presentation, he never lied to anybody. He never wavered. He did, allegiance to Yahweh.
Well, I never have.
If it's coming from Daniel, it's pretty kid cousin to
Pretty
from the Almighty.
Pretty solid, I think. God, we're weak. We understand. We see things, we're told, like through a glass darkly. We see in part and not in whole. And we have to take the rest on faith. And that's the part that challenges us, even though we don't always understand why you choose to do things this way. You also provide us with the faith to move forward, to live without fear in a place that can be confusing. But we see around us, we see you daily in ways that probably can't be explained. We're thankful. We're thankful for the words, and we're thankful for the faith that you give us to follow them. And be with us this week as we see opportunities to make your word and your presence known to other people who aren't aware of what they're seeing. Amen.
You guys can unmute yourselves. There we go. There you go. Well, I hope you guys, hello. I didn't see you guys earlier. Hello, everybody. How was, one quick thing, Cheryl, how was prom?
It was wonderful.
Good.
They looked so beautiful together. Oh my goodness.
I want to see some pictures. I know you took some.
Yes, they're all on the camera right now, but yes, I will get them sent to you.
Good.
It was
deal.
wonderful.
I hope you mothers all enjoy
You
your
said,
Mother's Day today.
talk about it. Where are we going?
Happy Mother's Day, everybody.
Happy Mother's
Mother's
Day.
Day.
Happy
Here's
Mother's
some
Day.
beautiful flowers.
Oh, look at those. Oh, you did good. Those are pretty, Louise.
Yes, you did, Louise. Oh, they're gorgeous.
And then something to celebrate later.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I
wow.
like that.
Oh,
What
and
a-
the booze too.
What a great son.
Have
Take care.
fun. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Happy-
Mary.
Bye, Scott.